This is the SBI4U 1-02 immune system culminating activity. We'll be just talking about the basics of the immune system, and we'll get right into it. First, we'll be talking about the innate immune response versus an adaptive immune response. An innate immune response is just a general blanket response to any disease, bacteria, or cancerous cell. This is the immune system that you're naturally born with, and it remains constant throughout your life. Now, I don't mean that it will remain equally strong. Of course, people get old and their bodies don't work as well, so this will get weaker. But what I mean is that it can't improve upon itself like how the adaptive immune system does, where it can grant you immunity to diseases that you have experienced in the past. An example of innate immunity is your skin, which acts as a physical barrier, and neutrophils, which are a type of white blood cell which kills invaders or harmful cells. Moving on to the adaptive immune response. The adaptive immune response is a slower but more effective response to disease, bacteria, or cancerous cell. It is not a general response. It is tailored to respond to a specific foreign invader or cancerous cell. It also lets organisms gain immunity to antigens they have encountered before. So that's what I mean by improving upon itself. It will allow you to better fight disease that you have encountered before. An example of part of your adaptive immune system are antibodies, which are proteins. I'm sure you've heard of them before. Your body produces to more easily defend against a specific antigen. An antigen is kind of just a catch-all word for disease, bacteria, or cancerous cell. We'll talk about antibodies later in this slideshow, so let's move on to the types of innate immune cells. Starting off with the neutrophils. They're the most common type of white blood cell. I believe they make up roughly 70% of the white blood cells in your body, so they are quite plentiful. They are first responders. They combat harmful antigens in a number of ways, such as phagocytosis, where they basically engulf and eat the antigen. They can use cytotoxic chemicals, which, as the name implies, are just toxic chemicals that will kill the antigen when exposed to it. Or when they're at their limit, they will lyse, which means that they will kind of explode and release a net made of their own DNA to snare and entrap antigens. Next up are macrophages, which are much larger than neutrophils and only perform phagocytosis. They do this by engulfing an antigen and trapping it in its membrane, where it's then broken down by enzymes. The macrophage will keep helpful proteins and excrete useless ones. Just like how you or me, how we eat food and then get rid of the waste afterwards, that's kind of what you can think of the macrophage is doing here. Of course, it will eventually get quote-unquote full, I believe, but it can eat like roughly 100 to 200 bacterial or viral cells before it reaches that limit though. It will also make sure to hold onto a piece of the antigen, since it's an antigen-presenting cell, engulf and present it to a dendritic cell. What is a dendritic cell? Dendritic cells are cells with these tentacles. If you pay attention to the image on the right there, they will cover themselves in pieces of antigens with those tentacles, and they will go to the lymph nodes and present them to dormant T cells. These are also often called virgin T cells. I prefer the word dormant. They'll continue to present antigens to dormant T cells until it finds one that can help with this specific problem. T cells are a part of the adaptive immune system. We will talk about those later in the slideshow. Moving on, these are part of the innate immune system, but they are not as I don't want to say important, but less relevant to what we'll be talking about. They'll mostly be doing background processes, or they will be used to counter a specific scenario, such as platelets. These work to clot your blood to prevent you from bleeding out and will repair any damage done to your body, e.g. cuts to your skin, damaged bones, and damage to your muscles. These guys will just fix you up from whatever problems you have. Eosinophils are white blood cells built to combat large invaders such as parasites that are too big to be killed by phagocytes, or phagocytosis at least. This is because usually when you deal with phagocytosis, you are bigger than the thing that you are engulfing. As you might have guessed, a parasite is much larger than a white blood cell, so it cannot be engulfed. How your body gets around this is it makes eosinophils, which will just kind of start disassembling the parasite on a cellular level, which is a little bit horrifying to think about, but you can't complain with the results. Basophils are in charge of flagging antigens and releasing cytokines, which are just chemicals that will flag down more white blood cells, and histamine, which will widen your blood vessels and kind of make your blood a little bit more runny, so it's easier to get to the area of the infection. Because of the role they play in triggering an immune response, they're often the cause of allergies. So if you have allergies, blame your basophils. There are other types of innate white blood cells. We will not be talking about them, such as mast cells, because they will have they're mostly overlapping or perform a similar function to one of the white blood cells that we've already mentioned. So we're just going to skip past those. We'll be going on to the lymphatic system real quick. The lymphatic system is comprised of lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes. These work to circulate lymph, which is just kind of a fluid, filter blood, and house white blood cells. Lymphatic vessels can be thought of a highway or transport system for lymph and white blood cells. These are located all throughout the body and lead to lymph nodes. So if you look on the image to the right, they lead all around the body. Of course, they're not as plentiful as blood cells, or blood vessels, but they will lead to the general location. It is important to note that lymphatic vessels are for white blood cells only. No red blood cells will ever enter your lymphatic vessels or lymph node. These are purely for white blood cells. Lymphatic nodes are small bean or ball-shaped organs that house unactivated B cells and T cells, or the dormant, as I mentioned before. They also work to filter and clean blood. These can be thought of as sort of little army bases for your white blood cells, where they're kind of stored until an infection happens, and then it will travel through the lymphatic vessels to the infected location. Now moving on to the adaptive immune cells, we're focusing on T cells for this one. Helper T cells are the type of adaptive immune cell which are geared towards dealing with a specific antigen. They do this by rapidly multiplying, then activating other types of adaptive immune cells, such as B cells. Remember, your helper T cell is only geared towards one thing, and your dendritic cell worked really hard to find this one helper T cell, which will then activate everything else. This process usually takes around 3 days, which is why I mentioned that the adaptive immune system was so slow. Some of the cells that the helper T cell will activate are killer T cells, also known as cytotoxic T cells. These cells will kill antigens in the body by releasing deadly chemicals, only for what they're designed to destroy though. This is kind of how they differ from neutrophils, which also release cytotoxic chemicals. I'm going to be honest, half of the battle of your immune system is trying to accurately identify what you're trying to kill. Your neutrophils are a little bit more gung-ho about this. They will actually harm your own body because they can't properly identify what they're supposed to destroy. Your killer T cells will make sure that they are destroying the correct things, so they are a lot more efficient with how they use their resources and are a lot more effective that way. Moving down the list, we have suppressor T cells. They work to bring you down after an infection has already been dealt with, or to temper your immune response if you're having an allergic reaction. This is just so your immune response ends, and so you don't have an immune response going forever, because that will eventually wear your body down and kill you. Natural killer cells are kind of in this gray area between adaptive and innate immune system. I just put them here for the sake of the flow of the slideshow. They're in sort of a gray area. If you want to count them as innate immune cells, that's okay. No one's going to blame you. These monitor your body for defective cancerous cells. If they find them, they'll attempt to make the defective cell commit apoptosis. Apoptosis is just sort of a controlled suicide. So if they detect anything's wrong with one of your cells, they will gently ask it to kill itself before it multiplies and creates a real cancerous tumor. Adaptive immune cells. This is about B cells and antibodies. B cells are activated by helper T cells. Once they're activated, they will rapidly start multiplying. Once there's a sufficient amount of B cells, they will begin to produce proteins called antibodies. Antibodies are small proteins that are built to latch onto things. This can serve a multitude of purposes. They can attach themselves to viruses to immobilize them, acting as a competitive inhibitor. This means that they just physically block the virus from doing anything. It's kind of like putting it into a straitjacket. And also, they will signal to other white blood cells that there is something wrong with the thing they are attached to. Again, as I mentioned before, half of the battle of your immune system is actually just trying to find what you're supposed to be destroying. And so, antibodies help with that. They can also do the same thing to your own body to prevent histamine from taking effect and repressing an immune response. This is good because it's really important that you come down from an immune response after something has already been dealt with, or if you're having an allergic reaction, because as you know, that can be life-threatening. Other immune defenses, as I mentioned before, your skin acts as the very first line of defense for your body, physically blocking out pathogens, dirt, and sunlight/radiation from interfering with the rest of your bodies and its processes. I'm going to say your skin is probably the most important defense. It blocks about 99.9% of all pathogens, and the real reason why you only get sick is because you either breathed something in you weren't supposed to, or because you got a cut on your skin. Sneezing and coughing. These functions work to expel harmful bacteria encased in mucus in your system. They also contain dead white blood cells that also have to exit your body because it has to get out somehow. I didn't mention it on there, but pus can also kind of be put into this category. Pus is just dead white blood cells. A little bit gross, but they have to leave your body somehow. An increase in metabolism. Your body increases your body temperature, so white blood cells can perform their jobs more effectively by kind of creating more activation energy so they can do phagocytosis more easily and release cytotoxic chemicals more easily. However, this can sometimes turn dangerous if your body heats up too much. What your body will actually sort of do if it believes it is losing a battle is it will kind of start playing a game of chicken where it will start heating up so much that it will denature all the proteins in your body. Of course, this will denature all the proteins in the virus as well, but will also start killing you as well. It's kind of a last defense kind of, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me sort of approach, which isn't great for the person that's dying, but it's kind of good for everyone else if the virus goes down with them. Last up is memory cells. This is your memory B and memory T cells. After an infection, some cells will be dedicated to remembering the virus in case the off chance you get infected by it again. This is what I mentioned before, when your adaptive immune system can improve, it will remember this thing so you are more better equipped for it for the next time that you encounter it. Going on to the passion project that I talked about bacteriophages. It was a little bit off topic, but it vaguely related to the immune system, so hopefully you'll let me get away with it. Bacteriophages hunt and kill bacteria and viruses to spread and reproduce. They do this by injecting some of their own DNA into the victim, if you want to call bacteria and viruses victims, which tricks it into producing more bacteriophages inside of itself. Once the virus/bacteria is no longer able to produce it, mostly because it just ran out of resources, it will lyse, releasing all the bacteriophages to start the cycle again. Our hope is by injecting these into humans, we can hope to fight viruses instead of relying fully on our immune system or antibiotics and our antibodies. It is important to mention that bacteriophages do not target human cells. These are specifically for bacteria and for viruses, so they're no danger to us. These are going to be helpful to combat superbugs, which are diseases that have grown resistant to modern medicine. Our hope is here because bacteriophages are living beings, that they will evolve alongside diseases and hopefully keep up with them so they will never have a sort of superbug on their own. And I believe that brings us to the end of our slideshow. I believe that's most of what I want to talk about. Thank you for listening.